Hello, and welcome to the Aligned Operator Podcast. I'm so excited today to introduce our guest, Sean Mabry. He's an expert copywriter who helps founders tell stories only they can tell, starting with a book. So his past and current clients include founders in the health and fitness, online coaching, real estate, and more. He prioritizes both depth and speed, delivering a final product clients love in as little as 10 weeks. Can you imagine that, guys? Your book, everything that you've wanted to put out there, done in 10 weeks. There's some really exciting things that we're going to talk about and how Sean gets down into this and is able to pull that information for you. But he's just an all-around expert through, he's had an established and constantly evolving process for this. So there's not really a template necessarily to the books, but each one is unique to the client. So because each one is their own genius beacon, he really works with you and your work that you already put out to draw in the people who need it most and deliver insights only you can offer. So we're going to go over a lot of this, how he does it, and just share a lot of Sean's expertise here. I just want to say, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I'm excited too.
Just a little context, guys. I first met Sean, I told you I was going to do this. I first met him at a Copy Accelerator Mastermind. And I remember we were at this table of just all these like brilliant people. It was a massive dinner, some kind of like steak and sushi, some special little like private room we were all in. And Sean was sitting next to me and he was so kind. He shared some of his steak with me and we've been homies ever since. So that's the key. That's the key to the best friends, is sharing steak, just so you know.
True. Very true.
No, to be fair, I actually probably haven't seen you, but I have watched your journey since then. But I have watched your journey, and we connect on social and all that. Sean's recently had a son, a couple years old now, and just, really has a beautiful life going. So he's been a copywriter for a long time, is well-renowned and really loved for his work. But his ghostwriting is an exceptional process that I'm excited to share with you all today. Sean, can you just tell us a little bit more about like your background and how you got here? Like what drove you to start ghostwriting in the first place?
Yeah, so the move to ghostwriting is kind of interesting because I, for years, resisted the idea. In fact, people would ask, like, oh, have you ever ghostwritten a book? Have you ever thought about ghostwriting? And frankly, I turned it down because at the time, I was convinced that the dollar effective rate of ghostwriting versus copywriting just didn't work out. And what actually changed my mind, the first thing that changed my mind was I had a client come in through a mutual connection and insist that I was the guy to ghostwrite his book. Now, again, I was not offering this service. I even told him basically everything I just told you about, like, I don't really do that, and here's why. But he kept coming back. I even tried to refer him out to someone else I know who is a very, very good ghostwriter. I would have been happy to have him go with that guy. But he was like, if you tell me no one more time, I'll respect that. But I really think it's you. So I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot. And that project worked out so well that I decided to just go all in. It felt better than the copywriting, frankly, has ever felt. Like, copywriting, not to knock it, but to me was only ever a means to an end, right? This feels like my true purpose. This feels like the work I am uniquely built to do when I'm ghostwriting people's books. And part of that comes from the fact that the writing is actually just the tip of the iceberg. Like, a great ghostwriter is first and foremost a great interviewer. And it turns out that I'm pretty good at that, right? Which I kind of knew, but I never really... I think that was one thing that I had to get my feet wet with it before I really understood the power of that and how much I am built to do that. And also how rare that is, right? You look at how, these days, there's a lot of talk about how like AI is eating copywriting, and there's degrees of truth to that. But one of the big things I think holds true is that the thing that AI can do is that if you already know what you want to write, then it can help you write it pretty quickly. But getting the things out of you that you didn't even know you're supposed to share, that's where I come in.
I love that. That is so helpful. Like, I know, I've had similar experiences with myself when I was first trying to learn how to write and really express myself in that way. Is like, it was kind of blocked. And then I would talk to somebody who's really good at questions and they would pull it all out. And they're like, these are things that you need to say. And having that skill set and ability is huge, because especially when these experts are so into what they're doing, they don't always remember, like, these are the key things that actually your genius zone and to bring it to other people. So it's really cool that the universe kind of brought that to you in like a silver platter, like, hey, no, this is really what you're meant to be working on and doing. So that's awesome. What has been like something that you've loved working on the most in this space so far?
I mean, every book is fun in its own way. I think, God, it's hard to pick just one. I will say that first project, obviously, is near and dear to my heart for all the obvious reasons, but also it's just an incredible story that the guy has. He actually, so I'll tell you the interesting evolution of chapter one, which is that when the very first version of the outline he brought me was, and this is a very common problem I see with any kind of like mindset, spirituality coaching. It was super abstract. It was like all these like big, like kind of wooey ideas. And I'm like, okay, I don't disagree. And I know there's a market for this, but most readers are not going to find purchase here. This is really tough stuff for most people to grasp. So what we need is, concrete stories that illustrate these ideas. And then once we agreed, like, okay, let's do a test run with chapter one, the first thing he brought me was the story of his mother's death. And it happened when he was in his early 20s, very violent, traumatic experience. And I was like, whoa, okay, and now we're cooking. And then once we got into revisions, so we had a full draft of the book done with that as chapter one. And then I was like, you know what? We need a little glimpse of who you were before that day, because it literally just started right there. And I was like, we need a little bit of setup, though. We need just a tiny bit of like, okay, who were you before that? And that interview ended up spawning a new chapter and a half that goes before that story now. But it was so, like, as he started talking, it was like, it went from like, okay, I think I can squeeze this in, to like, wait, we've been talking for 90 minutes and this is all gold. I have to fit all this in the book somehow. And also, it actually, just that chapter and a half is such a complete story that I don't want to like stuff it into the background, right? That's like so interesting. And also, like, speaking of like the accessibility of his story, that is stuff that like a lot of people can relate to. Even before, because even with, and this is always this is the kind of finesse of figuring out where to start your story. As much as because my original argument for starting with that story is like, oh, it's a big dramatic opening, right? And in a lot of cases that works. That is actually the best strategy. The only issue here is that is such an extreme story that if you're kind of leading with shock value, it can be hard to get over that and actually form a human connection with the author. What we have as chapter one now really grounds who this guy is and where he comes from, so that by the time we get to that moment, it's still shocking, but now we're feeling with him instead of it just being this spectacle we're watching from the sidelines, right? Like, wow, oh my God, like I've just spent like, a chapter and a half bonding with this dude. God, right when he was, and it's right when his life was supposed to be coming together, right? It looked like everything was on the up and up, and then this happens. Yeah. And so setting that up, right? That is that's storytelling.
Yeah, and the engagement side of it, like getting people to, really hooked on and who you are and related to you, but then also being able to share that kind of, it sounds like it's a traumatic story. I'm thinking maybe I've read something like this book before, but or possibly this one. But yeah, to be able to do that and like tell their whole story and get those like, pieces out. Because imagine that when an author or like a leader of some sort comes to you, a founder, a visionary comes to you, these aren't things that they would normally think to put in the book, but they're actually what makes it most relatable so that people can really benefit the most from what their work is.
I would say, yeah, I would go a step further. I would say it's not just that they're not aware that should go in the book. They're actively resistant, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and it's funny. One of the most common conversations I have with people is that what you think is book one is actually book two, because what they think is book one is like, oh, I'm going to be super tactical, right? I'm just going to no fluff, just give them the raw like facts and instructions. And the thing about that is, if you're really trying to build a mass audience, or even like a mass within a niche audience, what you need to do first is establish yourself as a character. And if if you're just like cutting to the bone and giving like just the fact, just the tactics, you're not doing that. you're just adding to the noise of the kind of information they're getting flooded with every day by ChatGPT, by other marketers, right? Like everyone is spamming them with this kind of how-to content. And so it's really hard to stand out if that's the battleground, right? If that's all, if you're just putting that stuff out, then it's like, okay, well, yeah, but like I have 10 other people telling me the same stuff. But the minute you start telling your story about how you arrived at these things and why they matter to you, then it completely reframes that information. Now you go from being the someone that it's like, okay, here's another source of information on this topic. I have a million. Gosh, I wonder what Michele thinks about XYZ, right? Even if it's unrelated to the topic. Even if it's just some random thing. Oh man, I wonder what like Michele would think of this movie I'm watching right now, right? In my mind, that's actually the ultimate goal of a book is to create that like character in their mind of you that's commenting on everything and has an opinion on everything, and they're like, man, I gotta know. I want to go back to the source, right? I want to go back to them. I want their take on this question, even if there are other people that have a reasonably good answer to the question. I still want Michele's, even if I can find the answer elsewhere.
Well, it's that trust factor. It's that, that's what we really come to in the market right now, especially is people are following and listening to the person that they trust. And this is a huge way to build that trust and alignment to them. And I love, how you want to keep them top of mind in everything that they're doing is like, how would I approach that? Because when I'm getting the most benefit from the books I'm reading, I'm often referring back to a story in there like, oh, how do I process in that way from this? Like it's that connection. It's a human connection through words. So I love that how did you really pull all of this out of them? Like how do you pull the story and the book itself out of the client?
So one of the first things I do when a client starts working with us is I start with a book proposal, which is exactly, if you were to go through a traditional publisher, this would be the first step. Before you write anything of the book, you got a proposal first, and you would shop that around to a literary agent that would then represent you to the publishers. Now, nobody's like requiring that of me, right? No one came and said, Sean, you need to start with a book proposal. I decided to do it that way because it keeps me honest. And it forces me to ask the right questions about the book early on so that by the time we start getting into, which by the way, part of that proposal is the outline that includes a chapter by chapter outline. And that's really where I hammer out the big questions. And there is like an intake survey that comes before that, but it's 10 questions long and they're very open-ended. They're the kind of questions where if you give me 3 sentences or 3 paragraphs per answer, either way, I can make it work because of how they're calibrated, right? So it's a very specific set of questions I chose very carefully. And from there, I almost always have like an immediate sense of, okay, this is the story we're telling. These are the major beats of it, right? Some of that might change a little bit over the course of the writing, but certainly enough to put a proposal together, get the client's buy-in, like, hey, this sounds right. You like this? Okay, great. And then as far as like how I'm able to find that story, this is where my grounding in fiction becomes really important because, I've been studying and writing fiction my whole life. I tend to think of things in terms of archetypes. So like the heroic archetypes, the hero's journey, which can sound kind of fancy and wooey. All that really means is that these are patterns that repeat all throughout human history and culture. Like we keep writing stories that sound like this for a reason. It's because the way that story structure works, it's actually a mirror to human psychology. Every story is about a character going through some kind of change, and they are on like a fundamental level, right? That's what the hero's journey is. It's a cycle of deep inner change that begins with an external starting point, right? There's something in their world that they're trying to get or get away from, but then that forces this deep interchange through the events of the story. And so when I can just look at someone's story of like how they got here, and I'm like, all right, before they even say it, I know what the deep, dark depths of that look like, right? I know the muck we're going to go through together and know how to make it, for one, interesting to read, but also build the safety and trust with them so that they feel okay going back there, which I think is another huge, huge thing. Like, this goes back to what I was saying about being a good interviewer, is that if people, and I will say I'm especially sensitive to this myself, but if people feel the slightest hint of like judgment from you, whoop, they just clam right up. And so you can't do that if you're going to be writing someone's story. You have to be able to, even if your own thoughts and opinions might say otherwise, you got to put those aside for a second and just receive the story as is, and then get to work telling it.
I love that. I love that. And the judgment factor, like that is incredibly important to remember and think about, but also like the way that you're able to interview them and ask the right questions. And then you also mentioned earlier that you're also like, you do a deep dive into all their existing content. And so you're able to repurpose a lot of that. Can you share a little more on that, what you're doing there too?
Yeah, definitely. That sort of research deep dive, one thing is that it becomes very obvious very quickly, like what their core stories are, like the things they repeat on every podcast. I always say, like, if you've done enough podcasts, like 80% of the content is identical. And I'm not saying now I'm granted I'm pretty early on the podcast journey myself. And I try not to repeat myself too much, but part of that is if you're an expert, there's certain core topics that are going to come up no matter where you go, because people want to know about those things, and you naturally come back to certain stories and certain examples to illustrate those things. Which is totally fine. My job is to lay all that out and then start digging one layer deeper. Let me think of a good example. So here's a really good example. Is I had a client who, it's funny, for the entire book, we only did 90 minutes of live interview time. The rest was me pulling from his other content. Now, granted, this guy's done a ton of other like media appearances, but one of the things I dug up was he had this story that he told kind of as like a funny aside during a podcast about how he just had this massive business failure, like basically walked away penniless, and then wound up working with a client in Pittsburgh. And while he was out there, he like ended up like getting involved with this like charity boxing event. And even though he'd like never boxed a day in his life, he like went and trained and got prepared and like participated in this thing. And even though he lost the match, it was this like great wake up call for him, where he was like, man, like that really forced me to get back on my feet, not just like financially, but like as a man, right? Like physically, emotionally, like get my head back on straight. And that story is like the crux of that's like the exact midpoint of the book. Again, you think of like a Hollywood screenplay. That's the scene. That's at exactly the like 45-minute mark, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, wow, like here's this guy, he's like in the pits, and the fact that he lost the match makes it so much better as a story beat, because it's like, here's this failure that crushed him, and then here's this failure that, even though they're both failures, this one lifted him up. Part of what I'm doing there too is that I'm constantly looking for the unexpected parallels in someone's story, right? Like where one thing maps to something that happened previously in the story. And I have another good quick example of this. I was working with another client who he comes from an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and talks about how the whole neighborhood would basically, they had a synagogue down the street, but they wouldn't use it. They would just gather in each other's basements and hold service there as a community. And later on, as part of the press tour for one of his projects, he's going to his first Comic-Con, and he's never been to a Comic-Con before. He has like no idea what to expect. But this one is like in the middle of, I think, Ohio. I have it right in the book. And it's like during a blizzard, so that like it's in a basement with 20 people. And so when I got to that point, I was like, oh, like, here's a fun little callback. There's better attendance on Friday services back in my hometown than there was at this moment. And again, like, those little things matter so much when you're writing a book, because that's what makes it feel human. That's what makes it feel like this is the same person going through this whole journey. The fact that they're able to draw those connections between something that happened here and something that happened 20 years ago, that's key. That makes it feel like a living, breathing person rather than just something that an AI spit out.
That's exactly what I was thinking of when you said this is like it's so often like, you'll play with AI to like write something for you or a post or something like that and it doesn't get the full context and unless you remember to feed it everything and also those little touch points. So like when you're going back through to edit it to make it sound like a human, always making sure that you're tying back to something from before that they can actually relate to and like see that full journey. I think that's where it can get really overwhelming just editing AI stuff. I can see where, this would be a huge asset to your clients to have you just be the person doing all this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and look, I eat my own cooking, right? Like I'm writing my own book right now and using all of the tools I use for my clients on myself. And they are helpful. Like, because trust me, it's funny, part of how I became such a freak for story structure and outlining was that many moons ago when I was just trying to be a novelist, I didn't outline anything. Or at least eventually I did start outlining, but I had no clue what I was doing, right? The outlines were meaningless. And it was the pain. I got through 2 whole novels and then was starting on my third when I realized if I don't really get a handle on story structure, I'm going to be in the exact same place at the end of this one. And that was such a painful experience. I'm sure like there are people listening to this right now that know exactly what I'm talking about. There's nothing more painful than like spending months on a project and it's like months of really deep focused work, right? Like you're having to like burn some mental calories to get this thing done. And then it doesn't work and you're just staring at this pile of words thinking, God, what do I even do with this, right? I wouldn't even want to show this to my family, much less the public, right? That's an awful feeling. I've been there. Trust me, it sucks. I don't want you to go there. So that's why I really obsessed over learning story structure and actually spent 3 years working with a Hollywood screenwriter because a lot of the techniques from screenwriting applied to everything. And that's what really forced me to get good at this stuff. And the fact that now it's second nature is because I've been practicing it for so long, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to put in the decade plus to learn this stuff unless you're a huge nerd for it like I am.
I love that. But and turning your passion into something that's helping other people bring their story to the world, like that's huge. That studying alone and like understanding, like you've been talking about, where the different transition points are and where to put different parts of the story. Like it's an incredibly valuable skill that I think that a lot of people they get this idea like let's just write a book and it's going to be our lead gen or something. Like it's just crazy. And I know that part of the tools that you have is also, you mentioned you've got something that's should I write a book or what kind of book to write in just 30 to 60 minutes. So it's a cool tool that I think that a lot of people could benefit from. And I want to ask you what's like behind the should I write a book and what's it really going to be for? How do you answer that for people?
Yeah, so the tool itself, it's a custom GPT, which by the way, I know I've been kind of poo-pooing AI a little bit here. I still use it, but in a very specific way, right? So I am not anti-AI, but what I am is an AI realist. Like, I'm very honest with myself about what it can and can't do, and I don't lower my standards to fit what the AI will spit out, right? Which I see some people doing. And the tool itself, it's designed to ask a series of questions that really drill down into who is the book for. That's basically the first question, and it's got a very specific way of like wording that and walking you through that. And then, like, what is the transformational promise at the core of this book? Like, who do they become by the end of the book? And then there's like kind of more tactical stuff around like what stories you need to tell and whatnot. But ultimately, that is the heart of the outlining process. Is figuring out who it's for, what transformation you're promising. And it goes back to what I was saying about story structure. If I know what point A and point B are for you as a person, then I know exactly what the story arc that mirrors that is going to look like. So if we can figure out that piece, this piece becomes easy, right? And that's what this tool does. It figures out who are you talking to, what transformation are you promising them, and then what does the arc of that look like? And this is the really crucial part. How can we make sure that this only can come from you? Which doesn't have to do with how qualified you are. That's not the question. And in fact, if you try to give it qualifications, it'll keep kicking you back saying like, no, that's not what I'm asking. Why is it that only you can tell this story in this way? That's the key thing. And it'll really hold your feet to the fire on that. I train to be very strict on that. And then, and then basically from there, it'll give you the invite to have a call with me to discuss next steps. But yeah, like, I mean, I've showed it to a bunch of people so far, and like, I've only gotten rave reviews on the tool because the thing is, like, they actually like how strict it is. Like, it will not accept an answer that could have come from anyone else. And nor will I, frankly.
Yeah. I love that. That's so important too. Like it's an important tool for people to have when they're considering writing it, but I like how it like removes a lot of the ego kind of thing because it's, especially when you're writing a book or writing anything, it's you got to keep in mind the end user. And a lot of times our ego comes in of like, oh, I have all these qualifications, or I want to share my story and be seen and be heard. And that's an important piece of this, but so is how the end result of like what you're trying to help people with, what you're trying to achieve. Like that's the most important part. And so this kind of just guides you through that, I imagine.
Yeah. And I'd even say that I don't love this word because I feel like it's been abused in certain ways, but vulnerability is a key aspect of this. Like, the kinds of things it's going to tease out of you are vulnerable, to be frank. And certainly by the time you're working with me, I'm going to dig up some stuff that's vulnerable. But the good news is that the reason why I do that is because that's what people can connect with. And you can't fake it, right? Unless you're a psychopath, which most people are not. You really can't fake that level of vulnerability. It has to come from within. And part of that too is that, and this kind of ties back to the idea of continuity as well. If it's just information floating out in the void, it's hard to trust it because it's like, well, okay, somebody said so. What does that mean? If it's information that comes on the heels of a very vulnerable story, then it tells us this information, this is wisdom. This is wisdom that somebody fought and bled for. They sacrificed something to get this information that they're sharing with us, and it's no longer information at that point. Now it is wisdom. That's the key distinction. Wisdom is earned, and it does not come easily. And that's precisely why it's so valuable and why we need to build your book as a vehicle for wisdom.
I love that. I love that. It's that constant learning. Like with you, it's like you're constantly obsessing. This is why I like to ask people ask questions about what they're obsessed with, because you learn so much more and faster from somebody who obsesses over something like you, and storytelling and the arcs and all this kind of stuff, where it's the same thing. It's like that wisdom that you've built out over years and years and years just because you really love something. And that's what the whole intent of your book is, to bring that to other people to help them do the same. So that's really cool that you're able to share that with people and help them with that, What would you say is like something that when is a book like really a strategic move for people, and when is it not?
There's a few things come to mind. So the first one would be if you have already built a successful business, but you haven't really built a personal brand, right? Maybe you're like known within the industry, within the community, simply because of what you've done, which is great. But in terms of building a book that a stranger can hand to another stranger, and they're like, oh my God, I need to reach out to this guy, right? Because again, that's the goal, right? That's when you know you've got a great book on your hands. That's where you need someone like me to help, because it is really hard to create that effect if you don't understand story structure and everything we've just been talking about. The other scenario is if you are going through a sort of career transition or a pivot, and you need to explain, like, okay, I was doing this, now I'm doing this, here's why. And I will tell you that here's why does a lot of heavy lifting for you, because one of the first, and I'm sure anyone who's going through this process knows exactly what I'm about to say here. The first thing people ask is like, well, why aren't you doing the other thing anymore? Did you fail? Right? Are you just not good at it? Right? And the reality is, like, in most cases, no. Like, you got what you needed from that chapter, and you're ready to move on to the next one. And so when you can tell that story and walk us through your thought process, then it goes from being a liability that you're switching careers and people are like wondering, like, well, why are you switching careers, to like this incredible asset where it's like, oh my goodness, this person has a whole new perspective on the new industry they're entering that all these people don't have, because everyone else here has, they've been here, they've been following the same old playbooks as always, like they have their built-in assumptions. Now here comes someone who's naturally going to disrupt that and bring something fresh and new. Again, this is where writing a book becomes so huge when you're going through one of those transitions, because you can really like step up and claim that. You can be bold in entering that new industry because now it's part of your epic journey. It's not just like, oh, I'm trying something different now, right?
And you're being able to tell, like, share that story with people and how they got there. Because, like, from a personal standpoint, like, and I've seen this with others too, is sometimes they might feel a little bit imposter syndrome or less than or something because they niche down into something different or they change things to something different. They get a little self-conscious. They can get self-conscious about it. But when you explain the big picture, what you got from this experience and why you're moving to this new one so that you're able to help people in the way that you really want to, and also share that entire, all of our life and universes, it's just a journey. It's our journey to our purpose. And that's just finding out what that is and being able to share that with people. So I love that you're able to, bring them that kind of side of things. What would you say is like the biggest misconception you've seen with founders around writing their book? Especially with everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest ones is, and it's funny because I've heard people directly say, well, I don't want to tell my whole life story, or I don't want to read someone else's whole life story. And I'm like, nobody's asking for that. You don't need to do that. And in fact, that is part of where story structure and all that outlining work becomes so important, is that, yeah, in some cases we might go back to your childhood, like that client I was talking about earlier, because that, in his case, that directly feeds into the transformation he's promising. It's a crucial part of the setup, right? Your book may not even start until like your mid-30s or something, right? Like, or whenever you started your current career path, if the stuff before is not relevant to that transformation. So we're not going to even worry about it, right? My job is not to like, I'm not like an IRS auditor or something. I'm not here to like get every tiny personal detail out of you. I'm here to tease out your story. And that story can be super broad, it can be super narrow. The only way to know for sure is to go through the tool or come talk to me and figure out what your story is, right? Then we'll know how much we need to include. But definitely we don't need to include your whole life story. That is not a requirement.
I think that's something that probably scares a lot of people because they just don't know where to start. And like what's, what story pieces or what pieces are important to the story and explaining the back. And that's where you asking them the questions, to get to the background, the whys, kind of guide them along that storytelling is incredibly important and necessary. And it's like you've said before, you're utilizing this as helping them write their genius beacon. So it's understanding what that is and figuring out how to tell the story for them to make the impact they want to with that. Genius beacon is not a common phrase I've heard often. You want to share a little bit more about what that means and how you came up with that one?
Yeah, so that is that was me kind of reflecting on like, okay, what, aside from just a handful of words in however many pages, like what is a book, right? Or at least the kind of books I love to read and write. What kind of book is that? And the phrase I came up with was Genius Beacon because, by the way, side note, this is my favorite way to name anything as a copywriter. Benefit plus mechanism. That's it, right?
I need to write that down.
So the benefit is that it's your genius. It's your genius beacon. It points to the thing that is uniquely yours to share. And the reason why it's a beacon is that a beacon is something that people seek out, which compare and contrast with a magnet, which, by the way, I hate the word magnetic. I hate magnets as a metaphor. I'm disgusted by them. Which I know they're super common. But the reason I don't like them is because a magnet is just an object. It doesn't have any like will or personality of its own. And so if you're just trying to like be or attract a magnet, well, what does that lead to? You're going to get a lot of people in like a very low state that they're just kind of like waiting to be acted upon by an outside force. That's not my kind of people, frankly. I like seekers who want something and they're willing to go the distance to find it. The beacon is there to make sure they go to the right place, right? Hey, come here. This thing you're looking for, yes, this is for you. Come here, right? Because when those people find you, they're going to make amazing customers, amazing clients, amazing team members, amazing partners, right? Those are the kinds of people you really want to work with, or even just have in your network. Those are the people you want, not the magnets, not the the lumps of metal sitting around waiting for something to act on them. And so that's how I came up with the genius beacon. It points to the thing that only you can deliver.
I love that. I love that because it's not just like you said, it's about attracting the right people, and that's through being yourself and standing in your genius zone and sharing that appropriately, and that's through the storytelling and the proper, the proper structure to it as well. So that's really cool. I also really appreciate that naming convention. I'm awful at naming things.
Yep.
That helps a lot.
It's so easy. It's a cheat code. Go ahead. Use that wherever you like.
I'm going to be using that. Yeah, I mean, I guess how do you really help founders discover like what their genius book or their genius beacon's going to be and what that book should be, like what kind of book it should be? You mentioned earlier the how-tos, the more tactical versus the more storytelling. Like, how does that play into the process?
That's actually a really good question, and that's another thing that the tool will help you tease out, is that there's essentially 5 core book types and kind of a 6th, which is basically just like a hybrid of multiple forms of the above. But you have a big idea book, a tactical book, that's like your kind of how-to one. You have a framework book, which is kind of in between. So like big idea is like when you have, this is like the most recent example that came out, but something like Let Them by Mel Robbins. That's a big idea book, right? It's like just like one really big, simple idea that applies in a huge array of different places, right? The tactical book is like, how to build XYZ, right? A framework book is essentially if you're teaching like a decision-making process, right? Like, here's how I approach problems within my industry and here's how I get through them, right? So it's a little bit more involved and there's like a single big idea, but it's not like all the way down in the tactics. And then the last 2 are a memoir, which is exactly what it sounds like. And by the way, like, I mean, in a sense, all of the books I help clients with are a hybrid of a memoir and one of the other categories, because I just think that's the smartest play right now. And then finally, last option would be a case study book, where this actually is a good option if you really don't want to put the spotlight on yourself. You can build a set of like really in-depth case studies of the people you've worked with. Basically have this collection that shows like, hey, here are the case studies of people that have been successful with XYZ. Here are the common patterns. Here are the things that keep coming up, right? That's a case study book. And then the hybrid, again, you can kind of mix and match all those to different degrees. Those really, like, once you sort out who you're talking to and what your promise is, it's going to start becoming pretty obvious which of those kind of books you should write, because each of those obviously fills a different role.
Absolutely. And I can see where, I like the combination of them. So it's a little bit memoir and a little bit of one of the others. And there's a lot that can be delivered in that format. And then do you typically like take that first book and then plan out like multiple books after, or are you just focused on the first one and then see what people respond to, or what does that kind of process look like?
Yeah, that really just varies by the client, right? Like some clients come to me and they already have like multiple books in mind. And so, like case in point, I've literally had a client where he thought he was going to start with book 2. And I was like, hang on, we're going to move this one first and then we'll get to that one next, right? And then he has like another 3rd book, which is kind of more of like just a for fun topic. And then if not that, then, we start with the first book. And then I actually think if you don't know for certain what you want the next book to be, don't worry about it, right? Like, get the first book out, see what the response is, and let that guide which book you're going to write next. Once you, especially with this kind of book, and I think this is the power of leading with a memoir, or at least a hybrid memoir, is you're going to get a ton of people encountering your work for the first time, but also being deeply engaged with it and super curious about like you and what you do. And the kinds of questions they start asking as they enter your world will be a huge hint of what that next book should be. And even what kind of format it should be, right? Like, if you get people getting like, oh, like, give me the tactics, well, perfect. So, like, now you can go do that kind of book. But it might be like, oh, like, who else does this work for, right? Maybe you do a case study book, right? It depends on what the audience gives you at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, so like letting them guide you. I mean, that's really how, technically, that's how a lot of marketing in general and setting up business and stuff should be. Is like you put something out, you figure out what the response is, and then you build off of that. And same thing with quarterly planning and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times I feel like people really get ahead of themselves, especially
Mm.
with the books, and that can be a big hindrance. Have you seen people just like have all these ideas and just get overwhelmed, and then that's like what happens in that area?
I mean that you're basically describing everyone I talk to.
All the visionaries, all the
Because
people.
yeah, because by the time they're even there, it's I have yet to talk to someone that's like, oh, I'm thinking of writing a book, and that's their first thought. By the time people come to me, at least so far, it's like they've already got like half a draft written. They may even have like a whole draft written. They've got like piles of notes. They might have like multiple book ideas bouncing around. And again, that's where I step in, and I love being the person that can guide them through that, because I'm like, hey, look, we're going to simplify this. We're going to find our entry point to tame all this chaos. But outside of just that, one of the things that I see most often is people will have this pile of notes and this outline, but it just comes back to who again. Like they haven't really nailed down who it's for. And two, like I think there's some overthinking it in terms of like, oh, like how does my book stack up against the rest of the market and blah blah blah. And those are all important questions. Like again, that's part of the book proposal. Is like there's this thing called comp titles where we look at how like what naturally are going to be the books that people compare your book against,
Mm.
and then how do we differentiate yours from those other books. But also like you want some competition, right? Because it shows that like okay, there is demand for this style of book. Now, when it comes to that differentiation, the one of the key things is unless you really know, like unless you just like really understand publishing and know exactly like how to counter those big name books, I still think you're better off just doing a hybrid memoir of some kind, because that has differentiation built in. Like it's your unique story, and if nothing else, that separates from, because no one else has that exact same story. And then a really good example of this actually. So I'm sure you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, right?
Of course, yeah. He's got some
Okay.
good stuff out there.
What's the name of his first book?
I don't know. I feel like my mom's been shipping them to me my whole life. I have no idea what the
Okay.
name
Well, what's the first one you think of?
to set about money stuff.
Okay. So most people, if you ask them point blank, they'll assume it's the Total Money Makeover, right?
Okay.
That's the one that blew up.
I
That's
want
his
to
second
preface it
book.
by saying I don't ever remember names of anything, but yes, I know
Oh,
that
okay,
one.
that's fair.
Okay, so the Total Moneymaker blew up for them?
Yeah, that's like, I mean, because I remember like when he first like was like everywhere, it was all around that book, right? Like that you couldn't separate him from that book. But that's his second book,
Hmm.
and that's very much a, I would say that's kind of between sort of a big idea and a framework book, because obviously there is like very tactical stuff in it, but it does have this big idea. There's a handful of like really big ideas that he's known for. But that book came second after his first book, which is much more of a business memoir, where he's talking about his own journey as far as like, how he ended up broke in the first place, how he pulled himself out of it, right? And what's interesting about that is, and this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, that book, it didn't blow up in the same way that Total Money Makeover did, but it laid the groundwork, because there was already like a pretty devoted Dave Ramsey following that grew a ton after the release of that book, and then that became his army of evangelists that helped the Total Money Makeover blow up and become this like huge cultural pillar that it was, right? Unless you know for certain what that pillar is going to look like, don't worry about starting there. Write this book first, because it'll help you find your way to that.
That makes a lot of sense because you're basically attracting the people who relate to your story and can learn from it. And then you're using that data of what they're needing and asking for to be able to develop the next step. Plus, you've already like kind of built a base. So when you're working with people, like, are you looking for people, like, are you working with people who already have an audience and a base? Or what are some of the qualifications that really help people make a book successful? Because, there's a lot of marketers who are saying, write the book and then use that as your lead into lead magnet and this and that. But like, what's the difference between that and the kind of books that you're writing?
So I would say the main difference there is, because I know exactly what you're talking about, and though that strategy does work, Like, I don't want to knock that, but I think we just have to be very clear on what it's for. Effectively, you're talking about like the free push shipping model, which is really popular. And again, it's popular because it works. Put together a book, get people to buy it. I mean, I have ended up spending like a good, healthy like 5 figures on people that I initially started with their free plus shipping offer on, right? So like, right, it does work.
It does.
But the thing is, those same books, I have never seen travel outside of that author's immediate community that they built, right? Because the books aren't really built to do that. They're built to like kind of essentially like expound on the content that they're already putting out that like is first getting the kind of top of funnel stuff. It's like, okay, we're going a little bit deeper on that, and then here's how to work with me, right, with my other offers, and then boom, there you go. And look, if that's all you need to do with your business, then sure, that works. But the kind of book that's going to go travel and live a life of its own and like give you like a bigger media footprint, it's got to go deeper than that, right? And so when it comes to what the qualifications are, like definitely we do look at the audience that you already have, and like yes, it's always easier if you have an established audience to work from. But one of the key factors here is if you just have a really, really great story to tell, and like you clearly are like the guy or the gal for your thing, then okay, well, let's talk about how we can put you in front of the right audiences with that book. For example, podcasts are an excellent vehicle for that because, look, if you listen to podcasts, you realize a lot of people do their book tours through podcasts. And there's tons of, whatever your niche is, there's tons of podcasts on that topic. And so that's a way you can really quickly start to borrow other people's audiences and very quickly bond with them in a way that, again, it just doesn't quite work the same way if you're doing this typical, free PDF type thing. The other part of that too is that this is a good chance to mention. I am partnered with an agency that does podcasting, video, really kind of anything you can imagine, like design wise. And so part of what I do is like, once I've done the ghostwriting, we work with them to figure out like, okay, what's the go-to-market plan, right? And that varies a ton based on the client, right? The book writing is pretty similar for everyone. That's much more a la carte, right? Because it just depends, what do you need? What are your goals? What do you already have, right? So that's usually kind of a separate conversation.
That's huge. That makes so much sense. You're really solving all problems in one place. So you're working hands-on with them on developing that story. And then you're a lot more invested in it too, to be able to guide them on the marketing strategy. Plus you have a huge marketing background. Let's be real. You're an incredibly good copywriter long before this, and in the marketing and psychology place long before this. And then, being able to bring the storytelling in and, help them pull out the book and their genius beacon, as well as the right strategy to be able to market that. Like that's amazing. I love that you're doing this, and I think you're bringing a lot of value to people.
Yeah, well, thank you.
How do people get this tool that we've been talking about?
So for your listeners, if you just say Michele sent me, I'll go ahead and give it to you guys for free. I do charge for it normally. I charge $7. For your listeners, I'm happy to just give them a little love as a thank you to Michele. Yeah. Easiest way to get in touch with me is either Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm super active on both. And just reach out and say, hey, Michele sent me.
Cool. We'll make sure that your connections are in the notes, and I appreciate you offering that. Also, guys, $7, please, either way, just get it from him. He's definitely got the juice. He's a good one to be talking to about this and writing books. And I do have one more question for you, and before we hop off, and I'll give everybody your information again. Okay, as this book storyteller and lover, what is one of your top 3 books?
Top 3 books, like ever of all time across everything?
Yeah.
Boy.
Make it just business. Make it just business.
Just business. Okay. That does help somewhat. One of the first, certainly one of the ones that had the biggest impact on me, it's a really good example of what I've been talking about too, is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. He does a really great job telling that story, which is interesting because it's like the biggest idea book possible, right? Or sorry, that book is also great, but actually I'm specifically thinking of The Surrender Experiment.
Yes.
Which is one that really is like much more memoir format. And that book, it's such a simple idea, just surrender. The way he tells that story in so much detail, it's a perfect example of an idea that most people are going to be skeptical of at first blush. Oh, just surrender. It's like, what the heck are you talking about, man? That makes no sense. just roll over and die. It's like, no, hang on. I need to show you the whole story, and you're like, oh, okay, now I see it. And it's a joy to read. I mean, he's got such a, you can really feel that very calm, centered energy coming out of him just through the book. So yeah, that one's definitely in my top three.
It is definitely up there. I have a story about this whole surrender thing, but first I want to mention that, you did surrender to this ghostwriting, path. And look where it's brought you. Like the things you get to work on and do when you do fully surrender to what it is. And, I feel like a lot of these opportunities open up. Mind you, when you do surrender to everything, some
Hmm.
things can happen that you don't love. When I first read that book, I started saying yes to everything, and I ended up with a roommate, all these other things that I did not want or accept in my 30s. And it didn't last long. It was only like a couple weeks, unfortunately. I just there's some things you just need to, be aware of with yourself. But yeah, the surrender experiment is a very good one, and there's a lot of ways that has helped me in life as well.
That you went for it. That's wild.
Well, there was a lot of things that happened at then that like 2 week period all at once, and I'm like, what am I doing? This is too much. And so, I've learned to surrender to the right things.
Yeah, which again, I mean, which is something I think actually Michael Singer would agree with, right? Like that's the nuance that comes from reading the book. You realize it's like it's not literally saying yes to everything, but it's like spiritually being open to everything.
Yes, yes, exactly. I could have handled it better, but it is what
Yeah,
it is. And
we
being
we all
open
learn. We
to
live and we
things.
learn.
Seriously, seriously. So, take it with a grain of salt, be cautious, but also be open.
Right.
It can lead you on really great paths. So, good book. I really appreciate that. And this whole conversation has been so much fun. I really appreciate you coming on and like sharing this with us. I loved hearing more of what you're working on and how you're really able to help people bring out their genius and share it with more people. You're making a big
Yeah.
impact.
Thank you. It means a
That.
lot.
Guys, if you're looking, you want to find Sean on Facebook and LinkedIn, it's Sean Mabry, Seanmabry. And I'll make sure that's in the show notes. Definitely grab his free book on, whether his tool on if you should write a book and what kind of book. It's a really great asset. So check that out and we'll make sure everything's linked for you. I appreciate you being here today, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been great.
It's been awesome.